From the library of the New York Stock Exchange at the corner of Wall and Broad Streets in New York City, you're inside the Ice House, our podcast from Intercontinental Exchange on markets, leadership, and vision in global business. The dream drivers that have made the NYSE an indispensable institution of global growth for over 225 years. Each week, we feature stories of those who hatch plans, create jobs, and harness the engine of capitalism. Right here, right now at the NYSE and at ICE's exchanges and clearinghouses around the world. And now welcome inside the Ice House. Here's your host, Josh King of Intercontinental Exchange.
When the kids aren't around and I'm hanging out with my brother, who, like me, is of a certain age, one of our guilty pleasures is to find the streaming service that's currently serving up The Graduate, Mike Nichols' 1967 classic with the Simon & Garfunkel score starring Dustin Hoffman as recent graduate Benjamin Braddock and Anne Bancroft as his seducer and psychic tormentor Mrs. Robinson. But the best line of the movie, to my mind, doesn't come from Hoffman or Bancroft. It's uttered at a welcome party for Benjamin at the Braddocks' Pasadena, California home by Mr. McGuire, as portrayed in A Man in the Gray Flannel Suit fashioned by Walter Brooke. And there's only one important word to the scene, and I'll let you savor it, just like my brother and I do.
What are you going to do now?
I was going to go upstairs for a minute.
Oh, I meant with your future. Your life.
Well, that's a little hard to say.
Ben.
Excuse me. Mr. McGuire.
Ben.
Mr. McGuire.
Come with me for a minute. I want to talk to you. Excuse us, Joanne.
Of course.
Please. Thank you.
It's just my friend. I look at him and I can't believe it. I simply can't believe it.
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
Exactly how do you mean?
There's a great future in plastics. Think about it. Will you think about it?
Yes, I will.
Enough said. That's a deal.
That's a deal. It's no understatement to say that plastics changed the world. The material revolution began in the early 20th century, but it wasn't until the 1930s when scientists found a way to synthesize polymers from crude oil at scale and discovered polyethylene, the things that really picked up. This, coupled with injection molding, made it possible to shape and create plastics into new shapes and sizes inexpensively and at scale. After World War II, plastics became ubiquitous. The world began harnessing this new technology, democratizing access to products and tools that had once been unattainable. There was nothing plastic couldn't do, from preserving food more efficiently, helping power our homes, delivering clean water, preserving food, powering our technology, and keeping our medicine and medical professionals safe, to more mundane things like providing us with more accessible tools, furniture, and toys, including the Lego block. Plastic's versatility and manufacturer's imagination have helped shape what we have consumed for more than a century. Along the way, we've also begun to appreciate the effects plastic waste has had on our environment. Scientists, producers, and consumers have turned back to the drawing board to find ways to make this material more efficient, recyclable, and reusable. Behind one of those companies reimagining the role that plastic plays in our lives is Tom Salmon, Chairman and CEO of Berry Global. He spends a lot of time thinking about these polymers and what his customers can create with them. More recently, the company is focused on how to reduce plastic waste and help its customers do the same. Our conversation with Tom Salmon is coming up right after this.
ICE is home to liquid global energy markets, including the broadest range of natural gas benchmarks from the US and Canada to Europe and Asia.
Natural gas markets are globalizing, driven by new LNG dynamics. The relationship between Europe and Asia is taking center stage in natural gas price formation. In Europe, we provide access to the two leading benchmarks, NBP and TTF.
In Asia, the Japan-Korea marker is the benchmark for pricing Northeast Asian markets. Focused on South and West Asia, ICE's West India Marker LNG futures contract supports growing natural gas demand in India and the Middle East.
Against the backdrop of the U.S. shale revolution, market participants have become refocused on regional, physical, and financial gas markets. In North America, we offer the most comprehensive collection of locations and liquidity in the physical and financial gas markets.
ICE offers the most comprehensive complex of global natural gas benchmarks. These deep and diverse markets allow for transparent pricing across the globe.
Our guest today, Tom Salmon, is Chairman and Chief Executive Officer at Berry Global. That's NYSE ticker symbol BERY, a Fortune 500 global manufacturer and marketer of plastic packaging products. Prior to this role, he served as the company's President and Chief Operating Officer and headed up its consumer packaging, rigid, closed-top, and engineering materials divisions. Tom joined the company in 2007 with Berry's acquisition of Covalence Specialty Materials, where he led the adhesive division. Welcome, Tom, inside the Ice House.
It's great to be with you, Josh.
Great to have a tape man in the Ice House. It's our first tape man.
Absolutely. Great intro as well.
Has Mr. McGuire's premonition always been prominent in your mind?
It hasn't. It was a complete fluke how I got into the plastics business. Got out of college. My mom and dad shared that, son, you have a great personality, so get into business. And that's how I ultimately migrated that way and ended up actually selling light bulbs of all things for GE.
Talking about your mom and dad, I've read that you come from this line of manufacturing workers. Your dad was a plant worker and you spent your entire career in manufacturing. What did your father do exactly and what inspired you about his work?
He was an electroplater in a small little electroplating facility well before things like OSHA and any type of employee safety type circumstances were taken into consideration. So always grew up with him coming home dirty after a hard day's work. And ultimately, it's aligned me with the workers that are so valiant in how they serve our company each and every day. We've got close to 47,000 frontline workers throughout the pandemic have provided the essential products that people have grown used to. And I think of my dad every time I see them.
Your dad came home from a long day at work. You were attending Fairport High School, originally home of the Red Raiders, in a village on the New York State side of Lake Ontario. Fairport, the crown jewel of the Erie Canal, they called it. What was it like to come of age there?
Everybody knew one another. They took care of the kids. I mean, it was an idealistic place to work and grow up. My dad actually asked me to work with him in the summers when I was a kid. He certainly wanted me to see what it was like to work in a manufacturing environment, to kind of inspire me when I went to college to do more. And it showed me how people can treat one another in a workplace environment and respect people. I wanted more for our employees, as I took on this job. And I learned that from my dad. I literally see my father and everybody then across our factories. I want to make certain they're treated with dignity, respect, and value.
Berry Global in Evansville, Indiana, much bigger town than Fairport. The great Evansville shipyard was the largest producer of landing craft in World War II, but has since given rise to the home of a massive Toyota plant and AK Steel, which ceased operations in 2020. What brought you from Fairport to the Hoosier State?
A whole series of migrations in terms of work ultimately was acquired by Berry as part of Covalence. After serving with Covalence, we combined the two businesses together. They were both owned at that time by Apollo. Josh Harris at the time, who was running Apollo, felt it was a great idea to combine these two companies because there was common raw materials. And I continued to serve and support and run different businesses and ultimately became the COO and then finally the CEO over 5 years ago now.
You mentioned your time at GE Plastics and Lighting, also stints at Honeywell and Allied Signal. How has the manufacturing industry changed over the course of your career?
Automation, digitization, and ultimately in our business, we continue to push more responsibility down, toward the work floor to give the people that actually make the product each and every day more responsibility in terms of quality, in terms of safety, in terms of making recommendations and suggestions on how you ultimately can improve profitability. They know it best. They're closest to it.
I mentioned you're a tape man, Covalence Specialty Materials, the leading producer domestically of trash bags, duct tape, and niche laminated and coated products, of which I am an energetic consumer, especially in the duct tape department. You led the adhesives division for several years before the acquisition. Can you take us back to 2007 and what Berry Plastics was like when it was home to only 14,000 employees?
Yeah, it was a huge transition because when we became part of the company, we were the largest addition that they'd ever made to the company. We brought to them a global business. We had a global portfolio and a global mindset. And that helped a lot. It ultimately took a business that was primarily North American focused and gave them a global looking glass, if you will, in terms of the opportunities that were out there. And it transformed the company at that time.
They say duct tape has thousands of uses. What are the top ones in your department?
It's amazing. I heard someone make the statement they've got 3 tools in their toolbox, duct tape, a credit card, and a phone. and I think it's pretty prevalent for most of us.
You spent a large portion of your career focused on Mr. McGuire's passion. We're going to get into some of the specifics of Berry Global a little bit later, but what drew you to plastics specifically, given the other things that you talked about, your dad and watching him work and the first roles that you had, and what continues to excite you about this segment of manufacturing?
Well, it was an abstract way how I got there. I was selling light bulbs for General Electric, and literally I was excited to work for such a world-class company. But when I took the job, they ultimately gave me a feather duster and a pricing gun. I was going out to grocery stores at 21 years old, 22 years old, and selling light bulbs and wiring devices to grocery stores, well before the cell phone and whatnot. So you were going out making these types of appointments. And I thought it was just a horrible job, and how could I continue to do that? So I was looking outside of GE, and I just miraculously, I got a phone call from someone in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where GE's plastics business was headquartered, and said, we'd like you to interview. And I said, I'm happy to do it. And I remember the gentleman I interviewed with at that time, his name was Damon Canfield, and he asked me one question. He said, Tom, he said, Boy Scouts sell light bulbs. And I said, who do you think sells them to the Boy Scouts? And he goes, you've got the job. And that ultimately began my career in the plastics business from that day forward, and I've been with it ever since.
Many of the roles that you held before you became Berry's chairman and CEO had you squarely in charge of Berry's largest businesses. Was that experience critical to helping you understand how the pieces all fit together? You said that your parents said you're a natural salesperson, but you're also learning a lot about operations in these roles.
I was one of the few non-engineers when I worked for GE in the plastics business. As such, I befriended a lot of the technical people. The technical people worked in the floor, and that was an environment I was very familiar with, because that's where my dad really gave me a start in terms of understanding how business operates. As such, I sold from the bottom up at that time. It gave me a strong inclination to make sure we could drive productivity, we can embrace empowerment on the manufacturing floor, and make them part of the solution. That's something that we've continued to embrace, and they're our most important people that we have in our business.
So let's spend a little bit more time on Berry Global. Before you and I met, I went to your website and sort of moused over the different product areas, and it is so expansive. We talked about some of them, duct tape and films and wrappers and plastic cups, but span the whole environment for us, because I don't think a lot of people are familiar, while they are with the products that you make, they're certainly not familiar with the Berry brand. What exactly is Berry Global, and what does the company do?
Well, we're one of the world's largest innovative packaging companies and protective solutions providers, and an industry leader in sustainability. Supported by 47,000 employees around the world at 295 plants, serving 38 countries. One of the largest in the industry.
Your annual report divides the company into several segments that include consumer packaging, international, consumer packaging North America, engineered materials, and health, hygiene, and specialties. Who are some of the customers that you serve?
We've got 18,000 global customers. It's basically a who's who of industry on a worldwide basis. And it could be any of the major consumer product packaging companies, Procter & Gamble, Kimberly-Clark, Mondelez, you name it. Any name that you use in your home each and every day, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, before bed, or when you get up in the morning, we're providing products to those solutions providers.
What do you think differentiates Berry Global from its competitors?
Well, we're a sustainability leader. That's our people, and it's our ability to innovate and collaborate so that we ultimately can provide solutions that not only meet the physical characteristics that they're looking for, but today especially meet their sustainability goals and objectives. Talking
about innovating and collaborating, again, you go to the Berry Global website and you're met immediately by this big announcement that Berry Global, Wendy's, and LyondellBasell, which is another NYSE listed company at LYB, announced that they're collaborating to move from plastic lined paper cups with limited recyclability to a single substrate clear plastic drinking cup that consumers will be much more easy to recycle. This is a industry first for the quick service restaurant industry and has the potential to increase the amount of recycled plastic used in the future. So I'm curious, Tom, how did the partnership come about? And is this an example of how Berry works with and listens to its customers to create innovative solutions?
Yeah, this success story is all about collaboration. Naturally, we've got a long storied history and reputation in the quick serve restaurant industry. Wendy's was looking to bolster their sustainability, performance, and record. We talked to them about what their needs were. We identified the opportunity to replace the paper cups lined with plastics that were not readily recyclable and pivot them to an all-plastic solution, a mono-based material. That was clear. In addition to that, we partnered with LyondellBasell in what is called advanced recycling, and it's a material that ultimately is able to take otherwise difficult to recycle materials. It breaks it down to its base, molecule, and provides virgin-like material. And as such, Wendy's is incorporating 20% what's called ISCC Certified Plus plastics resins in all of their cups. It's going to divert over 2 years 10 million pounds of waste from landfills. We're really excited about this, and this is a translation opportunity that's ultimately going to be able to convert to other QSRs nationally and around the world. So super excited about this, and it's fulfilling our promise. We felt always that sustainability could be a growth vehicle for our company, and this is one great example of doing the right thing, collaborating with a partner like Lyondell as well as Wendy's and delivering this success.
Did it take Wendy's to pick up the phone and dial you and say, we need a solution here, or were you out trying to sell it?
We're always out trying to sell it. We try to understand what the core goals and objectives are of our companies. Obviously, sustainability is important to everyone. Doing the right thing around plastic waste, keeping it from landfills, keeping it from our water systems is critically important. The more we can do to incorporate and demonstrate solutions like that creates and encourages more investment to ultimately create more infrastructure to support those waste streams that we can then turn into viable circular products, which is the goal.
We're going to get a lot more into circular in a few minutes, but when you sell to Wendy's, are they saying, great, Tom, love to do it, want to be exclusive because we want to be doing something that Burger King and McDonald's aren't doing? Or are you playing the field and open to everybody?
We clearly are educating everyone. We think our two primary roles as one of the world's largest converters is demand creation and education. So we're educating them on what the solutions could be to help address their problems, and then they ultimately dictate the scheduling in terms of when those get commercialized.
Berry reported its fourth quarter and fiscal year 2021 results the week just before Thanksgiving, and highlights of your talk with analysts included net sales growth at 22% and 18% for the quarter and the fiscal year, respectively. A trend across all the segments is the strong organic volume growth. Can you walk us through how you continue to think about driving organic growth at Berry?
It's all driven by customer collaboration. The company historically has been known to be a very inquisitive company. We've completed close to 50 acquisitions in our 50-plus year history, so we know about it and we're good at it. The one thing the market asked us to do is demonstrate your ability to grow organically. So we naturally increased our capital expenditures, but we did it in line with customers. Everything we do is customer linked. So we make certain that there's a specific demand and a specific commitment to pull that demand across the investments that we make. As such, it's generated and created this opportunity to have all of our business be low single-digit growers, which we're excited about. We were in 2020, we were in 2021, and we believe fiscal year 22 will be our third consecutive year of organic growth and demonstrating the kind of results that we're pleased to report for the quarter, but more importantly for the full fiscal year.
So I'm the son of a physician, so I'm slightly more aware than other folks would be, but before March 2020, most of us wouldn't have been able to define PPE. Berry Global's surgical product suite offered healthcare workers with some of the highest levels of infection protection. I'm curious what it was like for you, in February, March 2020, and thinking about the demand that was about to come down the pike to you.
Yeah, it's interesting. That is a business that we were very fortunate. We were making capital investments in that business to support growth in China as well as in North America. With being one of the world's largest providers of non-woven materials for PPE, whether it's surgical drapes, surgical gowns, or the masks that we've all become so accustomed for, we were poised and ready to serve the world when the pandemic hit. No one expected it could last as long as it did. But the level of agility that our team showed in terms of maintaining steady states of supply, innovating to ultimately increase that supply and benefiting us not only in terms of surgical drapes, gowns, masks, but also hard surface disinfectant wipes. The division has been very, very busy, as you might imagine. We continue to invest CapEx in that business because it's probably one of our most global businesses, and it's all designed based on providing that local value delivery capability, whether it's in Southeast Asia, whether it's in South America, Europe, or the United States. Very proud of how the team and the entire organization, we've been an essential provider throughout the pandemic. The plants have not shut down for the last 2 years, given the needs that are out there to provide these essential services and products that, we've all grown so accustomed to and needed to keep ourselves safe.
Bring us under the hood of that just a little bit, because in addition to all that demand and keeping up with the demand, we just did a show based on the basically 1 year production of full vaccine from Moderna and Pfizer and what Operation Warp Speed was able to do in terms of innovation in pharmaceuticals in just 1 year. From where you stood at February 2020, as you talk to your R&D folks and your people in the lab and thinking about, well, here's the feedback we're getting from hospitals and doctors. How do we make this stuff even better? What's happening in sort of the R&D area?
Sustainability is becoming, again, a growing area of interest in these products. During the pandemic, we didn't make face masks, but we made the material to make face masks. And when our customers said we're in short supply, we started making face masks. Before the pandemic, we didn't make face shields. They said, can you guys help innovate and collaborate? Can you help make us a face shield that's ultimately going to keep our people on the floor floor safe. We did that as well. That's the level of agility our team showed. And it was so impressive to see how the barriers could be broken down and we could enable this kind of innovation across our customer set.
You're a manufacturing company of 47,000 people. You don't have the luxury that we may have had at the New York Stock Exchange or at Intercontinental Exchange of saying, okay, let's all get onto WebEx and video and work remotely for a while. The New York Stock Exchange closed for 9 weeks before we could fully make this place safe, thanks to some of those products that you were talking about. What's it like for you as the CEO talking to your COO and your other leaders at the company saying, suddenly we have plants and we have a lot of people in close proximity. What are we going to do to sort of look at them squarely in the eye and say, you're going to be safe working here?
It goes back to what I said about my dad. I think about my father. What situation, would I put him in, and how do I find a way to make it as safe a situation as possible? We kind of had a divided workforce. We had, our office folks that could work at home and be supported by Teams and Microsoft 360. But then we had the people in the plant that continued to come to work each and every day. And it was important for me. I came to the office every single day throughout the pandemic. I wanted them to see my truck when they came in the plant floors each and every morning. And that was super important to me. We did temperature testing. We did everything that the CDC recommended to keep our people safe and then some. And we continue to do it today. We're not clearly out of the woods yet. We still have a pandemic to get behind us. But those are the heroes. Those are the heroes that came to work every day. They didn't ask, for special help or special support. And we needed to do our part to keep them safe. But they're the heroes for sure.
What would you say is the current status of the company in terms of percentage of workforce back in their offices?
It's probably close to 75%. And it's probably an average that's going to stay, I would say. About 70% of the time, the offices are fully booked in that regard. But certainly what we've learned is certain jobs can be performed remotely. And, we've embraced that.
What's your typical routine in terms of getting out customers and plants around the world, seeing them, pressing the flesh, talking to people face to face across the table, and how has that changed? And are you kind of back to normal?
Domestically, it's back to normal to a degree. Internationally, it's not. Our first international trip is scheduled for January. We go to Europe or Asia 1 week every single month. And the majority of those trips are spent on the plant floor. Meetings are held at the plant so we can shake hands, we can make recognitions and appreciate, what these people do each and every day to really enable us to please our customers.
After the break, Tom Salmon, chairman and CEO of Berry Global, and I are going to dive deeper into the role that plastic plays in our lives, how Berry Global is thinking about ESG, plastic waste and sustainability, and the future. And that is all coming up right after this.
The liberalization of LNG is creating a global natural gas market, with freight acting as a virtual pipeline between continents. ICE is home to global natural gas markets benchmarks in Henry Hub, NBP, TTF, and JKM. The nascent liquidity of spot LNG freight markets and the volatility of time charter rates has boosted demand for risk management tools. Now, you can manage LNG freight risk with ICE LNG Freight Futures contracts, which join our global natural gas complex. ICE is the first exchange to list LNG freight futures contracts underpinned by the price assessments of Spark commodities. Spark 30S covers a route between the U.S. Gulf Coast and Northwest Europe, while Spark 25S covers a route between Australia and China. The introduction of risk management tools for LNG freight will boost the efficiency of the virtual pipeline of LNG, a new catalyst for the liberalization of LNG and a critical milestone in the globalization of natural gas. Make the connection to a global natural gas market at ICE. Get started with ICE LNG Freight Futures today.
Welcome back. Before the break, Tom Salmon, chairman and CEO of Berry Global, and I were discussing his career, the team and work behind Berry Global, and the company's recent financial results. So, Tom, let's start the second half of our conversation with something that's dominating the headlines. The supply chain crisis has been a defining feature of the global economy in 2021. Ships waiting to unload cargo, truck drivers, warehouse staffers, dock workers working around the clock to restock in time for the holidays. What role does Berry Global play in the global supply chain, and how are you managing your risks during the crisis?
No doubt about it. Everyone's been facing difficult circumstance relative to particular key raw materials that may be imported, worker availability and shortages and the like. We have issues around that, but it's been somewhat mitigated by the fact that all our supply chains are local. So if we do business with you in Southeast Asia, we have a Southeast Asian supply chain. We're not importing materials from other parts of the world. Same thing in the United States. Dominated by suppliers inside the United States, ultimately to serve the products that we need. We also make certain that we always have multiple sources. We never sole specify anything we do, so we've got a variety of different choices that we can make to keep this flow of materials in our customers' hands.
We don't mind geeking out a little bit here on Inside the Ice House. So for our listeners, going back to Mr. McGuire's statement to Benjamin Braddock, in as simple a way as possible, but feel free to geek out too, tell our listeners how plastic goes from oil extracted from the ground and finds its way into a deli container.
Yeah, the oil ultimately is brought into a refinery. The refinery ultimately helps polymerize the material. The polymerized material gets pelletized. The pelletized material gets melted into a part. The part gets shipped to a customer. The customer fills the part.
And where do most of this pelletized material come from for Berry Global?
It's my belief we're the largest buyer of polyolefins, which is polyethylene, polypropylene in the world. We buy over 7 billion pounds, and it literally comes from all over the world. Obviously, anything we source in our Eastern European or Western European region comes from that part of the world. Same thing in Asia and in the Gulf Coast in the United States.
Intercontinental Exchange is famous for its grading of Arabica coffee beans. So up in Midtown Manhattan, there are people there who sort of taste and spit out the latest beans from the bags in Africa and South America and everywhere else you get coffee. How do you test and assess the quality of the pelletized materials or the raw material that you're getting?
I never taste it or spit it out ever, I promise you. For sure, they all have quality specifications that we require and that the suppliers ultimately certify as they come into us. Those all correlate to what physical properties the end customers want. And that's one of the cornerstones of what we do. We are material science experts, and we incorporate material science with design know-how to optimize the design to meet the needs, to minimize the use of the materials, to maximize function, and keep costs as low as possible. We weight reduce typically in a year about 1%. So think about that. We buy over 7 billion pounds a year. And just with our own design know-how alone, we reduce weight by about 1% a year. It's pretty significant.
So on that then, let's spend some time talking about the elephant in the room a little bit, which is plastic waste. Consumers are demanding change and looking to companies to help them reduce the waste that they produce. How's Berry Global thinking about it?
We embraced it. It's interesting. I just started my role as CEO in 2017. Shortly thereafter, we were contemplating the largest acquisition that we had done in our history, that we would have done, and we did. We closed in July of 2019, purchasing what's called a company called RPC, which is now our Consumer Packaging International business, as well as I was invited to speak at what was at that time called and still is the World Petrochemical Council. They wanted me to discuss, the benefits of being a converter with the advent of shale gas and the abundance of raw materials and low-cost materials and what that meant. We chose, and I chose, to take a different stance. We clearly recognized that the industry needed to think about plastic waste differently. And that's what we talked about. We took a bold stance in front of that group and said, we've got to change the image of plastics. We've ultimately got to redefine how people think about our materials and address the reality that plastic waste in river systems, in landfills, is wrong, especially when we have the technology to reduce and reuse the amount of materials to ultimately reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. When we did that, it was somewhat risky, but we got a lot of credit for helping change that narrative and begin that discussion around, wait a minute, how do we convert and use this as an opportunity to grow our industry and change the narrative on the industry? And just like with the Wendy's close that we talked about, that's just one example. The more demand we can create and demonstrate how these materials can be circular and reused, the better benefits we'll have to reduce plastic waste. And we're excited about it. It is clearly a growth vehicle for our company, and it allows the consumer who desires these materials to get more of them.
You just did your earnings call before Thanksgiving. As you're making this transition at this point in your tenure leading the company, any of the sort of analysts that cover the stock who may not be as forward thinking as you sort of look at you, scratch their head and say, Tom, you're killing the golden goose?
It's going to take time. There's no doubt about it. We're in the early innings of this, but the near-term demand outlook from, as I said, 18,000 customers around the world is amazing. We just recently increased our commitment by 2030 to increase our use of compostable circular materials in our fast-moving consumer packaging goods business to 30%. That's going to account for about 1 billion pounds as we accomplish that objective. So we're very excited about it. Again, we believe that we can grow, we can do the right thing for the environment, and the consumer gets the attributes of what arguably is the most innovative raw material on the planet that we've known in the last 75 years.
You, Tom, are still in the straw business. I went to your website, looked at it, and note that your website shows compostable, reusable, and also single-use products. The question for Annabelle, who always looks at me cross-eyed when I suck happily on a single-use straw, is the sun setting on that side of the business?
That business that you referred to, it ultimately provides certain film-based products that house agricultural materials. And the fact that we have compostable offerings and sustainable offerings gives our consumers choice. And that's what we want to do. We want to give them choice. We're not going to mandate what they do when they do it, but over time, you're going to see that migration. And the fact that, more people are embracing post-consumer materials and mechanically recycled materials, as well as bio-based materials, is exciting for us. And as they continue to grow in demand, the cost of those products will come down. And that's, again, what we think one of our primary roles is: be a thought leader and innovator, an ESG enabler, and give people choice through education and the fact that we can convert all these materials on our existing assets.
And this question, Tom, I hope is not for my son or my daughter, but your catalog also proudly proclaims your proficiency in the area of cannabis solutions. I wouldn't have thought that pot and plastics mix in the eyes of users, but prove me wrong.
That legalized industry in certain states continues to need, the attributes of plastics to properly store it, to properly protect it from young children that shouldn't be around it. And it's a growing opportunity for us.
A large chunk of the company's report, and you mentioned it already, focuses on its initiatives in sustainability, ESG, and social responsibility. Why are these efforts so critical to Berry Global's mission?
It's what our consumers and our shareholders expect. The importance of ESG right now transcends just Berry. It's part of the culture of doing business today, and it makes our business better. To have more diverse workforces, to have the appropriate governance policies in place, to do your role in terms of the environment. It's just the right thing to do. And we're proud of our accomplishments. We know we can do more. And by measuring and tracking, you get better. You only get better at that which you measure. And this is a great example.
Talking about doing your role for society, we hosted on the podcast just a couple weeks ago Mark Carney, the UN's Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance, talking at the end of the COP26 conference. Key events at COP focused on the need to address the more than 300 million tons of plastic waste produced every year and the 8 million tons that wind up in our oceans. Address the criticism that I sometimes hear that for all the efforts of companies and municipalities to gather up their plastic materials, bring them to facilities, there's only so many reuses for this material that you can find. You can't make fleece sweaters and automobile interiors forever. And some people are saying a lot of this really is not getting recycled.
Right now, the infrastructure is still lacking. It's a great opportunity for us, and it's what the greatest need is. The single biggest impact to our growing from a sustainability perspective as an industry is the amount of infrastructure to support the creation of those materials. The demand is there. I assure you, doing business with the 18,000 customers we do, the global brands that we serve, the public commitments that we've made, they need these products. That's why we've always believed the more demand that we can create, it helps monetize the problem. By monetize, it reduces the risk of you making a capital investment and generating a return. And that's what we're seeing happen right now. None of our customers are talking about getting away from plastics. They're talking about, how do I manage it responsibly? Let me know the range of optionality I have in terms of the materials I consider to use. Help me design it so it can be more circular, and then ultimately convert it for us. And that's what we're seeing, across the board.
You've mentioned the circular economy a couple times. It's captured the attention of the manufacturing industry. Berry announced its most ambitious sustainable packaging goal to date and aims to have 30% circular plastics across its consumer goods packaging by 2030. So for those who can imagine what you mean by circular, give a specific definition and unpack that a little bit for a listener.
Yeah, circular product, something that's used more than once. You're ultimately taking a product, you're reconverting it basically through a reclamation facility, repelletizing it or putting it through a advanced recycling process and then converting another material from it. The demand for this, just continues to grow. That's why we were excited to be able to make this new commitment. It's based on the pipeline of opportunity that we have in front of us from global brands around the world.
Berry Global has also been involved with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is a charity started by a retired sailor focused on engaging governments, cities, universities, businesses in the transition to this circular economy. The foundation publishes an annual progress report, and Berry Global is a signatory to its global commitment. What have you set out to accomplish, and what did the 2020 report outline?
The report outlined that we're making progress, it's not enough, and it's not fast enough. And that's what we've got to focus on. And our participation in this group ultimately helps from a converter perspective and a polymer knowledge perspective, help guide those organizations in terms of making thoughtful decisions and choices that can progress the change around circularity that much faster.
You were recently appointed as an officer and a founding member of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, a global nonprofit that seeks to bring together companies and partners in their mission of ending plastic waste in the environment. Some of the Alliance's projects have focused on building a waste management system in Bali, establishing an innovation platform, and supporting startups to end plastic. Tom, what does the Alliance seek to achieve, and how is its work progressing?
Very similar to what we did, with Wendy's. This is meant to be a cross-value chain organization focused on supporting education and infrastructure investments that help address plastics waste. The mode of the investments is targeted to ultimately incubate them and then ultimately scale them after you've seen success on an incubated level. And we're very excited about that. The primary target areas for us are some of the developed regions of the world today that do not have the infrastructure in place, and ultimately create that type of demand to spur more investment. The investments from NGOs, ESG funds, and the private side as well. And we're very excited about that. We're actually meeting in New York this week. And again, it's meant to be cross-functional, so there's brands that are associated with it, resin companies that are associated with it, NGOs, private equity funds, waste management funds, and the likes. And it's all about how we collaborate around plastic waste and ultimately find solutions for it.
China had been thought for years as a major player in the global partnership to work on recycling and managing of plastic waste. And how has the devolution of our relationship with China affected the opportunities and plans around the space?
Yeah, it's caused us all to be a lot more innovative and creative. And I think that's what gives me the confidence as this industry over the last 75 years has probably demonstrated more innovation, versus other substrates than you can imagine. Just think of your life right now. And in our view, given the carbon footprint, given the amount of energy, waste created, water consumed, plastics is an essential part for the world to get to net zero by 2050. And we believe that by driving circularity, it will ultimately reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and make that much bigger of an impact towards that goal.
I want to talk just for a minute about how this is sort of coalescing right where you live in Evansville, Indiana, in the Hoosier State. You have a deep connection with Indiana. Barry recently invested in a sorting robot for polypropylene recycling, helping the city of Evansville use robotic sorting in a single stream recycling facility, which can sort up to 80 items in a minute and uses AI to sort recyclables. This kind of investment, along with some of the recruitment efforts in the state, show the company is really dedicated to its Midwestern roots. But take us in that plant and tell us really what you see when you walk in that door and see these robots sorting recycles.
Yeah, it was difficult for the operators to actually sort, polyethylene, polypropylene, and we incorporated in support and in conjunction with the state an investment in optical sorting to ultimately make it easier to ultimately pull those materials. When those materials are pulled from the waste stream, they're ultimately diverted. We convert them and use them in our own manufacturing facilities. So we're trying to demonstrate the innovation that's out there and then have that be replicated by other municipalities to increase the yield from that type of investment.
Are they seeing new business opportunities?
They are. They want another one. They're already ready. They love it. They want another one, and they can justify it on their own.
And in Kentucky, Ohio, your neighboring states, are you sort of seeing people cross the border and looking over the fence a little bit?
We are appealing to local governments where we reside and educating them that the states that do a better job in terms of reclamation will have more growth opportunities, because these facilities to reprocess these materials are going to go in close proximity to where the material is collected to reduce transportation costs. And the more the states can do for that, it's a greater pipeline for growth and new jobs.
Any particular businesses that you find are really good at this that we should be looking closely at?
There's not a business out there today that's ignoring sustainability and the opportunity that it presents. Consumers want it. They value it. When they can make a choice or on a sustainable solution, they feel good about it. They want to do that. And if they can do that without compromising what they're used to, even better. And that's what, some of these solutions, certainly around advanced recycling and the Wendy's projects, provides their consumers.
Talking a little bit more about your community involvement and also sharing the leadership lessons that you've acquired over your incredible career. You're actively involved in the Evansville business community and serve on the board of Old National Bank, a community bank with more than $24 billion in assets across Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin. What have you learned during your time on the board of a bank that started some 187 years ago on the shore of the Ohio River?
I'm a big believer in stealing shamelessly great ideas. I was thrilled to become a member of that board because of its reputation, the communities it served. It's truly a dignified, respected, ethical company. It's one of the most ethical companies in the banking industry. And for me to be privileged to serve on that and then learn from their examples of how they serve their local communities, how they participate in not only how they care for their customers, but how they care for the geographies that they serve. It was a great example for me. I'm thrilled to be part of that group.
So, Tom, you've closed the books on the third quarter and the fiscal year of 2021 on a very strong note. You're here in New York, meeting with customers, industry partners, and others. As we look toward the Christmas season and the new year, what is ahead for Berry Global in 2022?
We're going to continue to grow our company. The company's committed to grow again, low single digits in fiscal year 2022. Our business only becomes better with the capital investments that we're making alongside of our customer partners. And again, we believe that, increasing the use of recycled content, minimizing waste and improving recyclability are really keys to helping address and end plastics waste. And ultimately, how we're doing it with the responsible use and reuse of these materials is just a critical transition to the net zero economy.
What message do you have for consumers, for my son, my daughter, other people who are constantly using plastic in a million different ways every day to do their own part in reducing the footprint?
Properly sort whenever you can and use the proper receptacle. It's critical. And you're going to see more automation and innovation in that category with ways to make it easier to sort and reclaim. This is a precious resource. It's a precious resource that can and will have multiple lives. We need the access to it. The demand is there.
Tom Salmon, thanks so much for joining us inside the Ice House.
Thanks, Josh.
And that's our conversation for this week. Our guest was Tom Salmon, Chairman and CEO of Berry Global. If you like what you heard, please rate us on iTunes so other folks know where to find us. And if you've got a comment or a question you'd like one of our experts to tackle on a future show, email us at icehouse@ice.com or tweet at us at IceHousePodcast. Our show is produced by Stefan Capriel with production assistance from Pete Ash and Ken Abel. I'm Josh King, your host, signing off from the library of the New York Stock Exchange. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Information contained in this podcast was obtained in part from publicly available sources and not independently verified. Neither ICE nor its affiliates make any representations or warranties, express or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information and do not sponsor, approve, or endorse any of the content herein, all of which is presented solely for informational and educational purposes. Nothing herein constitutes an offer to sell, a solicitation of an offer to buy any security, or a recommendation of any security or trading practice. Some portions of the preceding conversation may have been edited for the purpose of length or clarity.